Hi, everyone. It's not every day we get a VIP on Plastic EP's live TV show. And let me tell you, Jay Bergen has written a fantastic book. It's a big worldwide seller. Lennon, the Mobster, and the Lawyer. And I just want to give you a great welcome there. Jay, how are you today?
I'm great. Plastic. I'm excited to be here. I've never spoken to anybody from Melbourne, Australia, and I'm thrilled. I'm just thrilled.
Jay, I'm as thrilled as you. And I want you to know, everybody out there, even including in Australia, we want you to go and buy his book. It's all on the big internet booksellers here in Australia as well. Angus and Robertson, Booktopia. It's Dimox. I'm familiar with all these big stores, and your book is selling like hotcakes. Even there in America and around the world, we want everyone in the UK to go and buy it. You must be so happy with this book, Jay.
I am very happy, very, very, very happy. And you know, you mentioned that you had interviewed Bob Gruen. Bob Gruen has become a very close friend of mine, and his publicist, Carol Klenfner, is my publicist also. So we've got a great team together, and I just want as many people as possible to read this book.
Exactly. And I want to say the great thing is Bob Gruen did the forward to your book, which people won't know. Let me tell you, Jay, he's the kind of person, right, that comes across that this case that he did with John Lennon, right, over the bootleg album. I'm going to call it Roots, the bootleg album.
Yes.
The thing is, what comes across to me is John Lennon is a person that puts out quality products and doesn't put out products that are like, how can I say, inferior products. And that must have been the biggest basis of your case there. But what I want to know is, let's talk a bit of strategy. I'm keen to understand the kind of strategies that you employed before the case with John.
Well, when I didn't really know anything about Morris Levy until I went to this meeting at Capitol Records. I didn't know that John was going to be there. The Capitol lawyers were telling me about these threats that this Morris Levy made, that he was going to be putting out this album. And halfway through the meeting, the conference room door opened, and who walked in but John Lennon? And to say that I was a little bit stunned would be a major understatement. But we got along very well. We talked a lot about the facts, and it was a result of that meeting and a suggestion that I made to John that he went into the studio and finished the album in the next 2 days on February 4th and 5th, 1975. Capitol got it out, and the day after he delivered it to Capitol, February 6th, I met again with John, Yoko, Harold Sider, and some of the Capitol lawyers. And I have to tell you, Plastic, that one of the things that I learned early in my career as a trial lawyer, that the facts were all important. So I spent a lot of time with John and May and Harold Sider, who was his business advisor, you know, learning the facts and getting the facts down cold. And, you know, part of my strategy was, you know, the more I learned about the facts, the more I realized that Morris Levy was making up this whole story, that he had an oral agreement with John Lennon to sell this album on TV for $4.98. It was ridiculous. And so, you know, that was what we stressed. That was the first step in the strategy. The next step was that after Capitol released the official John Lennon rock and roll album, Morris Levy pulled the advertising for Roots from TV. And then about a week or 10 days later, we're talking about middle of February, late February, he filed a lawsuit in New York Supreme Court, which is a state court, claiming that there was an oral agreement, that there was fraud, you know, and he named Capitol and EMI as defendants. And it became pretty obvious to me and to John, because we were talking about this, that this was really a strategy by Morris to think that he could get John and Capital and EMI to make some kind of a deal. You know, Morris Levy, as a lot of people know, he was a grifter. He was hooked up to the mafia, and you know, fraud was his middle name. I think that Morris thought that John was going to do some kind of a deal, because on January 30th, when Harold Sider, John's business advisor, met with Morris, and Morris played him on the tapes that John had given him of the unfinished album, the "You Can't Catch Me" version with John singing it, Morris said to Harold, "I'm going to put it out. I've got a shot. I've got a shot." And that told me that he was gambling that there was going to be some kind of a deal down the road. And Plastic, the next thing that happened, which was the big break in the case, was about 10 days later, Morris, I guess not getting a reaction to the first lawsuit, filed a case in federal court in New York alleging an antitrust violation and alleging $14 million in damages. That was completely ludicrous. It made absolutely no sense at all. And the other thing is that once that happened, the New York cases, New York Supreme Court cases, move very slowly. In federal court in New York, the day they're filed, they are assigned to one judge, what's called for all purposes. In other words, that judge handles the entire case from start to finish. And the judge that was assigned, just by luck of the draw, was a judge named Lloyd McMahon, who I knew had been on the bench for about 16 years, was a very experienced trial lawyer and a judge. And I knew he ran a very fast calendar. And I remember saying to John, this is a big mistake, because this case is really going to move quickly. And we have to, you know, be ready to help move it quickly. So the big strategy at that point was to really push the case and get it to a trial. And Plastic, we got to trial in 10 months. We were on trial in January of 1976. And Morris, that's the last thing that Morris and his lawyers wanted.
You know what's amazing to me, Joe? I just got to say, after understanding your book and how you came to putting it out, and it's something so unique that no one can actually talk except yourselves. You're in that position where you're handling it for John Lennon, and I get the impression that John basically didn't put up with any crap. That basically he said, right, let's get into this. I'm going to go there. I'm going to testify. I'm not going to do it the way these people wanted to do it. I don't put out inferior products. I have a contract with the biggest recording companies in the world. Morris Levy can't tell me what to do, and I'm going to go there and I'm going to say it as it is. And he had no fear, and that's exactly what he did. Am I right or not?
Yes. No, you are. You're 100% correct, Plastic, because he decided right in the beginning, I'm not going to settle with him. And also, the two of us were able to work together, you know, very closely. Whenever I needed John's help, getting him ready for like a deposition, he was there. And the other thing, you know, kind of jumping ahead to the trial, he and Yoko, the night before the trial started, January 11th, the trial started on the 12th of 1976. I was staying in a hotel in Manhattan near my office because I had a long commute out into New Jersey, and I couldn't do it every day. And I told John that's where I'd be staying. And at midnight on Sunday night, he called me and he said, "Can Yoko come to the trial?" And I said, "Absolutely. I'm sorry. I would have invited her." Now, Sean had been born 3 months before that, in September. So the two of them showed up the next day, picked me up in their limo with my associate, Howard Roy, and they came to every day of the trial, Plastic, 20 days in January, March, and April. they were not there, and they were there on days when John did not have to testify. Morris Levy was missing in action. When he realized that this was going to a trial and the trial was not going well, he disappeared. And in fact, just to add one more thing, I told John, John and Yoko kept saying to me, look, we just want to hold down the amount of money that John is going to owe Morris. And I said, if I have anything to say about it, you're not going to owe anything to Morris. And John would say to me, well, why do you say that? I said, because you're going to tell the truth and we know the facts, and Morris is not going to tell the truth because he's going to have to make up most of this. And that's the way we proceeded. Exactly what you were talking about.
Now I've got to ask you, Jay, can you tell me the outcomes? Are you able to discuss the outcomes of these cases? Can you discuss that? Is that public knowledge or is it private,
yes,
confidential?
it's public knowledge. It's in the book. I don't mind telling people.
Yeah, if you can go through that with us, I appreciate it because that's what people want to know.
In January, at the end of the hearings in January, we had this judge, no jury, so it was up to the judge to decide the case. Finally, I think the date was February 20th. I got a call from the clerk's office, the judge's clerk, saying the judge's opinion is ready. So I sent somebody down to pick it up in the courthouse. And Apple's lawyer, a fellow named George Grumbach, called me about maybe 20 minutes or a half hour later, and he said, Jay, have a nice weekend. And I knew his this was a Friday night, 6 o'clock. I knew his office was closer to the courthouse. So he kind of had the opinion before, our clerk came back from the courthouse. And sure enough, I called John and I said, John, I got the opinion. We won. And he was ecstatic. He was ecstatic. But then we had filed counterclaims on behalf of John, and Capital and EMI filed counterclaims against Morris and his companies. And that's when we went through a lot of the important testimony about how John, this was a cheesy album. I mean, I think that's a quote from John's testimony. The cover was an old cover from 1968 or something with this out of focus picture of John. And one of the keys, I think that a lot of people may not notice, when you look at the back cover of the Roots album, which was the bootleg album, you will see that the songs are all listed, and next to them each song is John Lennon's name. You and I know that that's the place for the name of the authors of the songs, the composers of the songs. So there would be people who might think, oh, John Lennon wrote all of these songs? Well, how could he do that? These were all songs from the 50s that John decided to record because they were the songs he grew up on. I mean, Peggy Sue, and he testified that Bebopalula was the first song that he played with his band at a church fete the day he met Paul McCartney.
The Quarrymen.
The Quarrymen, exactly. So, the album, the Roots album was a mess. And also, since it was based on a recording of an unfinished album recorded at 7.5 IPS, inches per second, it was basically a something you'd take home on a cassette and listen to at night, because it was unmixed and unfinished. In fact, when John told Harold Snyder that he had given these two reel-to-reel tapes of the album, Howard said to him, I wish you hadn't done that, because knowing Morris and his reputation, that's what he was going to use to put the album out.
Now, Joe, I've got to ask you about the money that was awarded. Can you just go through that if it's public knowledge? I just want to know. Did it cost John a lot of money at the end, or basically it didn't cost him very much?
Well, it didn't cost him very much because there was an award by the court, and let me see if I can just find it here.
Was there an award of 400,000?
Well, the total damages among Capital, EMI, and John were $429,200. This was a ghastly defeat for Morris Levy, and that doesn't count the legal fees. But Capital and EMI settled behind my back and John's back. Instead of getting from Morris $274,500, they settled for $170,000. And I don't know whether Morris really paid them, but that left us holding the bag, so to speak. We had to defend the entire case on the appeal. Now, fortunately, and this may not have been clear in the book, in order to appeal, Morris had to put up a bond, which would cover whatever the damages were after we did the appeal. He then had to hire a separate law firm to represent him on the appeal. So he had two sets of lawyers who were representing him on the appeal to the Federal Court of Appeals in New York.
Joe, you know, this is amazing. As I said, your book is totally amazing because you're going around with boxes of stuff and then you figure out, hey, I can do a book and tell this unique story to the world that no one knows. And that's the great thing about your book.
Well, I carried these, the entire file, almost 10,000 pages of transcripts and exhibits and everything. Plus, I still have some of the Beatles and John Lennon record albums that we used as evidence to show that John and the Beatles took great care, as you know very well, and as a lot of our listeners know, took very great care with the album covers. I mean, the Beatles really turned record album covers into an art form, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So I had all of those documents. I carried them around and through 5 moves and a very unpleasant divorce. I think that's kind of an oxymoron, I guess. And I had all these files, and I'd never really looked at them until about 5.5 years ago. And I went out to my garage where they were stored in a nice, safe storeroom, and I started reading John's testimony, and that's when I thought, I got to tell this story because nobody else can tell it. Nobody else has all the trial transcripts. And I think it's important for John Lennon fans and Beatles fans to hear John's testimony in his own words, where you can almost imagine that you're listening. You can hear John's voice when he testifies about how he and the Beatles learned, as he said, learned the trade.
Now, Joe, I want to point 2 things out, right? One is when you look back, and it's 2022 now, and with your book out there all over the world and selling worldwide, isn't it great when you reflect now that you represented the greatest rock and roll artist that ever lived on the planet, and you were there, but what you did is at the time, you focused on the job and case ahead of you. You played it cool. You did what you needed to do, and you helped John get through it and Yoko. And isn't that the biggest satisfaction that you could have, that you helped him out by doing your job proper? And that's the most amazing part when you reflect now. Do you agree with that?
Yes, I do. I do. And it was, it was one of those dreams representing John Lennon, because I had seen the Beatles in Forest Hills in August of 1964. But I'll tell you, the bonus, I guess the cherry on the top of the ice cream, is that I was able to tell a story in this book so that people, fans, rock music fans, John Lennon fans, could experience what I experienced spending all of this time with John and really getting to know him as a person, Plastic, not the rock icon. When I was with him, he was just another guy in New York.
And you know what the other great thing is? After this case, he took 5-6 years off. He didn't want to play the game anymore. And that timing, as I said, because his son was born, it's just like it ran on. You agree? Did you find that was the right thing for him to do, to take time off now after this hassle as well?
Well, he told me that he had thought he was not a good father to Julian because Julian was born right in the middle of the Beatlemania, and either he wasn't around, or when he was around, he wasn't around, and that's why he dropped out, and that's why it was so important. And once Sean arrived, John had two things in mind. One, he wanted to, dispose of the Morris Levy situation so that he could now devote virtually all of his time to Sean. And that's what he did until, the case was over in early 1977, and they didn't start recording Double Fantasy until August of 1980. He was chilling out.
Now, Joe, just got to ask you, I want everyone now that's seen this interview to go out and buy the book, Lennon, the Mobster and the Lawyer. It's a worldwide seller, as I said. Go on the net and buy it. If you'd be kind enough, Jay, to tell everybody any links that you got regarding the book or anything there you'd like to say that's on the net.
Well, you can get it on Amazon, but also you can get it on my website, which is Lennon, the Mobster, and A-N-D, thelawyer.com. And also there are some documents on my website from the case, including a 2-page letter by Dave Marsh critiquing the 2 albums. And I used Dave Marsh from Rolling Stone as an expert on the counterclaims. And that will lead you also to my Facebook page, where there are a number of other documents from the case. And we're continuing to add things to both the website and the social media, the Facebook page, so that the fans and people who really are into the book can see some of the things that we used as exhibits at the trial.
And Jay, I just want to say, I salute you. And as I said, this story is so intriguing that the only real story they're going to know is by reading the book from cover to cover. Go out there and buy the book. As I said, Lennon, the Mobster, and the Lawyer, available everywhere worldwide. Thank you again, Jay.
Thank you very much for having me. And remember, Plastic, there are about 8 photos, Bob Gruen photos, in the book that are really classic photos. So that's another reason to buy the book.
Unbelievable. See those photos, and also see the photos where Bob Gruen took a photo and John said, I want to use that for one of my covers about all my legal problems.
Yes, he did. He
That's
did, Bob.
Jay.
You're welcome.